Master Chief Thomas Flynn had seen a lot of strange things in his 22 years with the United States Navy SEALs. He had watched men become legends and legends become ghosts. He had stood on the decks of destroyers as the sun bled into the Indian Ocean and had buried friends in the sterile, quiet earth of Arlington. He thought he was immune to surprise. But as he stood in the sweltering Florida heat of the Coronado Naval Base, watching a wiry figure emerge from the anonymous black Suburban that had just rolled onto the tarmac, he felt a jolt of something he hadn't felt in a decade, genuine, unadulterated confusion. The vehicle had no government plates, no military markings. It was as invisible as the passenger it carried. The driver, a broad-shouldered man in a plain suit, didn't get out. He simply popped the trunk. I retrieved a single olive-drab duffel bag, set it on the hot asphalt, and drove away without a word. And then she walked toward them. She was tall for a woman, but that wasn't saying much against the wall of muscle that was the SEAL team. Her hair was cut short, practical, the color of sand. She wore no uniform, just a pair of well-worn hiking boots, dark tactical pants, and a simple gray t-shirt that did nothing to hide the leanness of her frame. She carried no visible weapons. There were no patches on her sleeves, no flag, no name tape. On paper, she did not exist. Flynn watched his men. A ripple of quiet murmurs passed through the line of 12 operators, all geared up and ready for the mission brief they had been expecting. They were the best of the best, men who had seen female soldiers before, of course, intelligence officers, pilots, support staff. But this was different. This woman was walking toward them like she owned the ground, and the look on her face wasn't one of nervousness or eagerness. It was a look of quiet, absolute assessment. She was reading them, their spacing, their gear, their posture. In the 5 seconds it took her to cross the distance. Flynn stepped forward, his own expression a mask of stone. "You must be the asset," he said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement designed to put her in her place, to remind her that on this base, in this world, he was the apex predator. The woman stopped a few feet away. Her eyes were a pale, unsettling gray, like the sea before a storm. They didn't flinch under his gaze. She didn't offer a salute. She didn't offer her name. She simply looked past him for a moment, scanning the line of SEALs, and then returned her unsettling stare to him. "I'm the shooter," she said. Her voice was low and calm, completely devoid of bravado. Before Flynn could respond, a sharp voice cut through the thick air. "Attention!" It was the team leader, Lieutenant Commander Reynolds, who had just stepped out of the hangar. He wasn't looking at Flynn or the men. He was looking at the woman. His face, usually a permanent scowl, was etched with a shock of recognition. He snapped to attention himself, his heels clicking together on the tarmac. It was an involuntary, visceral reaction. Every single SEAL on the line followed suit without thinking. The clack of 12 pairs of boots snapping together was a single percussive sound. Flynn, caught off guard, felt his own spine stiffen. He hadn't done that in years for anyone outside of a formal ceremony. His eyes darted from Reynolds to the woman. She gave the slightest nod, a gesture so small Flynn almost missed it. It wasn't a thank you. It was an acknowledgement. Reynolds held his salute for a beat longer than necessary before dropping his hand and walking toward them. He looked at the woman, then at Flynn. "Master Chief," Reynolds said, his voice tight, "this is the mission package. You'll have the details in the air. She's your one and only priority. Her word is my word. Is that understood?" Flynn's jaw tightened. "Sir, with all due respect, I need to know who I'm putting my men on the line for." Reynolds looked at the woman. She gave another nearly imperceptible nod. Reynolds turned back to Flynn. "You don't need to know, that's the point. She's a ghost. No ID, no record. And if anyone can pull this off, she can. Now get your men on the bird. We're wheels up in 20. As the SEALs broke formation, heaving their heavy rucksacks toward the waiting C-130, Flynn walked alongside the woman. She carried her own duffel with ease. He looked at her profile, trying to place the age. Late 20s, maybe 30. There were fine lines around her eyes that spoke of squinting through high-powered scopes in harsh sun. Her hands were scarred, the knuckles slightly swollen like a boxer's. "Okay, Ghost," Flynn muttered, a hint of derision in his voice. "You got the lieutenant commander snapping too, you got my boys jumping, but out there in the shit, that don't mean a thing. You understand me? Respect is earned, not borrowed from some spook in D.C. She finally turned to look at him directly. For the first time, something flickered in her gray eyes. It wasn't anger. It was a deep, profound weariness. "I know, Master Chief," she said softly. "I've been earning it for 10 years. You just never heard about it." The interior of the C-130 was a deafening, vibrating metal tube. The SEALs sat in 2 rows, their backs against the cold fuselage, the dull roar of the engines a constant companion. The air smelled of jet fuel, hydraulic fluid, and the nervous sweat of men about to step into the unknown. Flynn watched the woman, the ghost, as she sat apart from the others, her duffel bag serving as a backrest. She hadn't spoken a word since they boarded. While the other men checked and rechecked their weapons, a ritual of pre-combat nerves, she simply sat with her eyes closed. Her hands rested palms up on her knees, completely still. It wasn't sleep. It was a state of deep, focused meditation that Flynn had only ever seen in the most seasoned martial artists and snipers. She was conserving energy, slowing her heart rate, preparing her mind for a single, overwhelming purpose. Finally, Lieutenant Commander Reynolds' voice crackled over their headsets, cutting through the engine noise. "Listen up. We're doing a halo insertion, 0300 local. Drop zone is 20 clicks northeast of objective." A holographic map flickered to life on a small screen in the center of the cabin. It showed a sprawling, fortified compound nestled in a barren, rocky valley. Reynolds used a laser pointer to highlight a single, isolated building, a small hut with a corrugated tin roof about 800 meters from the main complex. "Primary objective," Reynolds said, and the laser dot settled on the hut. A high-value target, a weapons facilitator known as the Engineer. He's been supplying insurgent forces with advanced anti-aircraft weaponry. We've lost 3 birds and 18 good men to his hardware in the last 6 months. The SEALs leaned forward, their faces hardening. This was personal. "The compound is a fortress," Reynolds continued. "Heavy AA presence, roving patrols, and at least 50 hostiles on site. A direct assault is suicide, which brings us to our secondary objective." The laser dot moved from the hut to a high ridge line overlooking the valley, a full 1,800 meters from the compound. "This is where she comes in." All eyes turned to the woman. She hadn't moved. Her eyes were still closed. Reynolds' voice was grim. "Her designation for this op is Reaper. She will insert with the advance team, a Charlie and Delta squad, and set up on this ridge. Her job is to provide overwatch. Once the main assault team breaches the compound, all hell will break loose. The Engineer will run. He'll have one escape route, a tunnel that leads to a bunker. He'll only be exposed for a few seconds as he moves from the hut to the tunnel entrance. Reaper's job is to end him before he makes it." One of the SEALs, a burly man named Kowalski, let out a low whistle. 1,800 meters? At night? With wind gusting up to 30 knots in that valley? That's a once-in-a-lifetime shot, sir. That's not a shot. That's a miracle. Reynolds stared at the man. "Which is why she's here and you're not." Another SEAL, a younger man with eager eyes, spoke up. "What's her record, sir?" What's her confirmed count? The woman's eyes opened, and they fixed on the young SEAL, and for a moment the temperature in the plane seemed to drop. Reynolds looked at her, then back at the men. "You don't get it, do you?" he said quietly. "There is no record. There are no counts. The missions she's been on, the targets she's eliminated, they don't exist. They're not in any database. The men she saved by pulling that trigger in the dark, they don't know her name. They don't even know she was there. She's a ghost for a reason." Flynn, listening intently, felt a chill that had nothing to do with the plane's temperature. He looked at her hands again. Scars, knuckles swollen. He knew the marks of a woman who hadn't just shot from a distance, but who had been in the thick of it, who had fought hand to hand when the silence was broken. Who was she? Later, as the plane droned on, Flynn went to sit beside her. He offered her a canteen of water. She took it, taking a small, measured sip before handing it back. "You knew Reynolds," Flynn said, not a question. "We worked together a long time ago," she said, her voice barely audible over the engines. "Another life. Another name. He looked at you like you were a ghost he was happy to see." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "He was my spotter. On my first deployment. Took a round meant for me. I carried him 6 miles through the mountains to a medevac. He owes me a life. Today, he's just paying the interest." Flynn was silent for a long moment. The image of this slight woman carrying a 200-pound man through mountains was staggering. 6 miles, he muttered. "It was a long night," she said simply. "So this shot, 1,800 meters. Can you make it?" She turned her head and looked at him. In the dim red light of the cabin, her gray eyes looked almost black. "Master Chief, I've made shots you wouldn't believe. Shots that would make that Kowalski kid pass out just hearing about it. The question isn't if I can make it. The question is if you and your men can cause enough chaos to give me the 2 seconds I need. Can you do that?" Flynn felt a grin, a real one, spread across his face for the first time in weeks. "Hoo-yah, Reaper," he said. "We can do that." The jump was a leap into an abyss of ink. The night was moonless, the sky a black velvet sheet pricked with a billion cold stars. The SEALs fell in silence, their dark shapes swallowed by the void, each man a ghost, tethered to the earth by gravity alone. Flynn watched the altimeter on his wrist, at the numbers counting down with terrifying speed. At the designated altitude, his parachute deployed with a soft, muffled crump, and the brutal tug of the harness yanked him from freefall into a gentle descent. Below, the valley was a patch of deeper blackness. He could just make out the faint, twinkling lights of the compound in the distance, tiny pinpricks of yellow in a world of shadow. He scanned for the others, counting the canopies as they blossomed in the darkness. 1, 2, 3. He counted 12. And then a 13th, smaller and lower than the rest. The Reaper. She landed with the grace of a falling leaf, her rucksack touching down seconds before her feet. By the time Flynn had gathered his chute and moved to the rendezvous point, she was already gone, vanished into the rocky terrain with her spotter and a quiet Texan named Jones. They were heading for the ridge, a brutal 2-hour climb in the dark. The assault team moved out, a silent, deadly snake winding its way through the boulder-strewn valley floor. Flynn's world narrowed to the man in front of him and the ground beneath his feet. Every sense was dialed to 11. The smell of dry dust and sagebrush, the distant, mournful howl of a wild dog, the feel of his rifle's stock against his cheek. They reached their final assault position, a shallow wadi, 300 meters from the compound's outer wall, with 45 minutes to spare. Flynn checked his watch. 0430. Dawn was still an hour and a half away. Perfect. He pulled out his night vision monocular and studied the compound. It was exactly as the intel had shown. Guard towers at each corner. Manned by figures cradling AK-47s. A roving patrol of 2 men and a dog making a slow circuit of the perimeter. The main building, a 2-story fortress of mud brick, sat in the center, and off to the side, isolated and humble, was the hut with the tin roof. He switched his radio to a secure channel. "Reaper, this is Viper 6. We are in position. How copy? Over." The wait stretched for an eternity. Then a whisper in his ear, so faint it could have been the wind. "Viper 6, Reaper. In position. Rifle ready. Have eyes on the objective. Waiting on your go." Flynn let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. She was there. 1,000-yard stare in the flesh. He switched to the all-hands channel. "All stations. This is Viper 6. We are a go for red light. Stand by." The next 40 minutes were the worst. The waiting, and the listening to his own heartbeat. He watched the patrol pass, counting the seconds. He watched the guard in the nearest tower light a cigarette, the flare of the match impossibly bright in his night vision. He thought about the woman on the ridge, alone in the dark, her eye pressed to the scope. Her finger resting gently on the trigger, waiting for a door to open that might never open, waiting for a target to appear that might not appear for days. Then, the sky in the east began to lighten, a subtle shift from black to deep, bruised purple. The pre-dawn glow started to paint the landscape in shades of gray. It was time. "Red light, red light, red light," Flynn murmured into the radio. The world erupted. The first explosion came from the main gate, a deafening crump that sent a fireball clawing at the sky. And it was the breaching charge. Simultaneously, the .50 caliber rounds from the 2 support teams opened up, chewing into the guard towers, sending the guards spinning like rag dolls. The night vision was useless now, overwhelmed by the flash. Flynn was up and moving, his M4 shouldered, his world a tunnel of sound and fury. They flowed through the breach in the wall like water, a wave of green and tan combat gear. Chaos was their element. The enemy, stunned and disoriented, fired wildly into the dark. Flynn's team moved with practiced precision, clearing rooms, eliminating threats, pushing inexorably toward the center of the compound. The crack of AK-47s was a constant percussive backdrop, punctuated by the deeper, sharper reports of M4s and the thump of grenades. In the center of the maelstrom, Flynn kept one eye on the isolated hut. Now through the smoke and dust he saw the door. It remained closed. "Come on, you bastard, run, you're trapped. Run for your hole." Inside the hut, they knew the drill. The engineer, a thin, rat-faced man with a graying beard, was already on his feet. The distant thunder of the assault was his cue. His guards were at the door, firing blindly into the smoke. He didn't wait. He slid back a heavy rug, revealing a steel ring set into a concrete slab. He pulled. The slab swung up on hydraulic hinges, revealing a dark, concrete-lined shaft with a metal ladder bolted to the side. The tunnel. 50 meters of underground passage that led to a fortified bunker, a Humvee, and a waiting escape into the mountains. He took one last look at his burning compound, at the men dying for him, and he felt nothing but a cold, sharp relief. He had done it again. And he had slipped the noose. He climbed onto the ladder, his heart pounding with a thrill of escape. He descended 3 rungs, 4, 5. On the ridge, 1,800 meters away, the world was silent. The sounds of the battle were a distant, muffled rumble, like thunder over a faraway mountain. The woman known as Reaper lay prone, her body molded to the cold rock. The modified M82A 1.50 caliber rifle was a part of her, an extension of her own skeleton. Her spotter, Jones, lay beside her, a high-powered spotting scope glued to his eye. "Compound is hot," Jones whispered, his voice tense. "Assault team is at the main building, no movement at the hut." "Patience," she breathed. Her eye was a universe away, lost in the crosshairs of her scope. She had the hut's door, framed perfectly. The crosswind was gusting, left to right, and at nearly 25 miles per hour. She had already dialed in the correction, holding 3 mils into the wind. Her breathing was slow, rhythmic. Her heart rate was down to 40 beats per minute. She was not a woman on a ridge. She was a machine, a single-purpose tool of immense and precise violence. "The door's opening!" Jones hissed. Through her scope, she saw it. A sliver of darkness appearing in the gray metal, then a head peering out. Then, nothing. The door closed. "He's checking," she murmured. "He's smart. He knows we're here. He knows what we want." "Did you have a shot?" "Negative. Not clean." "He knows." Inside the compound, Flynn saw the door open a crack, then slam shut. His heart sank. "He's not running, he's bunkering down," he yelled into his radio. "We need to blow that hut." But even as he said it, he knew. A breach of that hut would take time. Time they didn't have. The enemy was rallying. The fire was getting heavier. They were about to be pinned down. On the ridge, Reaper's mind was racing, but her body was still as stone. She knew the psychology of a man like the engineer. He was a rat. And rats always run. He was just testing the waters, seeing if the coast was clear. She had to make him believe it was. "Jones," she said, her voice flat, "get Viper 6 on the horn. Tell them to pull back from the hut. Now, create a gap. Give him an exit." Jones looked at her, bewildered. "Pull back, but—" "Do it." Flynn's radio crackled. He couldn't believe the order. Pull back? Let the pressure off? But there was something in the Reaper's calm, transmitted through Jones's tense voice, that made him obey. "All teams, fall back to the breach. Now. I consolidate on my position." The SEALs, confused, pulled back, their fire slackening. The enemy, emboldened, pushed forward, their shots chasing the retreating Americans. Inside the hut, the engineer heard the fire slacken. He heard the American guns grow quieter. He heard his own men cheering, thinking they had driven the devils off. A slow, triumphant smile spread across his face. They were retreating. The noose was loosening. He climbed back up the ladder, lifted the slab, and peered out. Smoke. Dust, chaos, but no Americans in sight. It was now or never. He scrambled out of the hole, leaving the slab open, and ran for the door. His bodyguards, surprised, tried to follow. He burst through the tin door into the gray dawn light. On the ridge, Jones saw it all. "He's out! He's running! Oh my God!" He's heading for the tunnel entrance behind the hut. I don't have eyes on it from here." Reaper didn't respond. Her scope wasn't on the hut door. It was fixed on a small, shadowy patch of ground to the left of the hut, an area Jones couldn't see. It was the tunnel exit. She had studied the satellite photos for 18 hours straight. She knew the terrain better than she knew her own face. The engineer wouldn't run into the hut. The hut was a death trap. He would have an escape route that bypassed it entirely. The hut was just a decoy. The real tunnel entrance was 50 meters away, behind a rocky outcrop, and there he was, a small, scurrying figure darting from behind the hut, heading straight for the rocks. The wind gusted, a fierce blast that tugged at her clothing. She held her breath. Her finger took up the slack on the trigger, and the crosshairs settled on the man's chest. He was moving fast, jinking, presenting a hard target. The distance was now 1,850 meters. The wind was a hurricane. The light was poor. She had one shot, one. She didn't think. She didn't calculate. She felt. The rifle was her body. The bullet was her will. She squeezed the trigger. The crack of the .50 caliber was a thunderclap that rolled across the valley, startling birds from the rocks a mile away. The massive round, traveling at nearly 3 times the speed of sound, devoured the distance in just over 2 seconds. The engineer was 2 steps from the rocks, from the tunnel, from freedom, when a force equivalent to being hit by a small car slammed into his chest. The impact lifted him off his feet and threw him backward several yards. He was dead before he hit the ground. On the ridge, the recoil had slammed the rifle's stock hard into Reaper's shoulder, a bruising punch she didn't feel. She immediately worked the bolt, ejecting the spent casing and chambering a new round, scanning for more targets. But there were none. The mission was over. "Target down! Target down!" Jones screamed, his voice cracking with disbelief. "Confirmed kill! Oh my God, you got him! You actually got him!" In the compound, Flynn heard the distant, echoing crack of the rifle. He saw the engineer's body crumple to the ground, a dark smudge against the gray rocks. For a moment, the entire firefight seemed to pause, as if the very air had been sucked from the valley. Then, the enemy's resistance crumbled. Leaderless, their will to fight evaporated. They threw down their weapons and ran. The extraction was a blur of exhaustion and adrenaline. Flynn's team swept through the compound, securing intel and rounding up prisoners. He walked to the body of the engineer. The shot had been surgically precise, a perfect center mass hit. He looked up at the distant ridge, now glowing gold in the rising sun. He couldn't see her. She was just a part of the rock. He met them at the designated extraction point an hour later. The Reaper was already there, her rifle broken down and stowed in her duffel. She looked tired, drawn, the gray eyes even more pale than before. A smudge of dirt was on her cheek. She looked like she'd just been for a long, hard hike. Kowalski, the SEAL who had doubted the shot, walked up to her. He stood there for a moment, his face a mixture of awe and shame. Then, without a word, he extended his hand. She looked at it, then at him. She shook it. Her grip was firm. "Oh, thank you," he muttered. She just nodded. As the helicopter lifted off, taking them away from the valley of death, Flynn sat across from her. The men were silent, lost in their own thoughts, the adrenaline crash leaving them hollow. He looked at the woman with no name, no ID, no record. "That was the single most impressive thing I have ever seen," Flynn said, his voice loud enough for only her to hear. "In 22 years, and no one will ever know." She looked out the open door of the helicopter, at the shrinking valley below. The wind whipped her short hair around her face. "They know," she said softly, gesturing with her chin toward the exhausted men. "They know." Later, back at a forward operating base, the formalities were brief. A general Flynn had never met shook her hand. A man in a suit handed her a new set of papers, a new identity. The Reaper was about to cease to exist, replaced by someone else, a teacher, a clerk, a ghost preparing for her next haunting. Before she left, Flynn found her alone, standing by a Humvee looking out at the desert. He didn't know what to say. Thank you seemed absurdly inadequate. She turned as he approached. For the first time, a real smile touched her lips. It was small, but it reached her eyes, softening them. "You and your boys did good, Master Chief," she said. "The chaos was perfect." "Reaper," he said, the name feeling strange on his tongue. "Who are you? Really?" She looked at him for a long, silent moment. The wind whipped between them. "I'm just a shooter, Master Chief. A very, very good one." And that's all anyone needs to know. She picked up her duffel, the one with no markings, and walked toward a waiting Humvee. As she got in, she paused and looked back at him. "Take care of your boys, Flynn. They're the real heroes. I'm just the cleanup crew." The Humvee kicked up a cloud of dust as it drove away, disappearing into the vast, unforgiving landscape. Flynn stood there for a long time, watching the dust settle. He would never see her again. He would never know her real name. There would be no medal ceremony, no citation, no paragraph in some future history book. But for the rest of his life, every time he looked at his men, every time he remembered that impossible shot in the gray dawn light, he would see her face. The woman with no identity, no record, who had appeared from nowhere, saved them all, and vanished back into the nothing from which she came. And he would snap to attention, just for a moment. Out in his own mind, a silent salute to a ghost.